welcome everybody to our next episode of Art of the Card. We are absolutely thrilled. This is a dream come true for this episode to have Terry Smith, the iconic artist of comics, the San Jose Sharks logo. You know him from the Provisions of 91, 92 Fleer. Those are my favorite cards. I post about them all the time on Instagram. And so I'm honestly honored. My wife told me to, have a shot before this one. So this is an honor. As a kid, I grew up like tracing these cards, trying to draw them, trying to like mimic what Terry did for these pieces. And so it's just an honor to have him on today. So thank you, Terry. Welcome.
Glad to be here and very flattering. Thank you.
Yeah. So just a little backstory. So at the National last year in Chicago, I was walking around and I saw all of these prints and I was like, man, I recognize those. And I look up and I see Terry sitting there and he's talking with people and he's got, his LeBron print and Luka and Giannis and all these, the athletes of today with the prints that he's selling and creating. And I was like, man, this is the guy. This is the guy right here that created all of these cards that I grew up loving and still collect to this day. And so I started chatting with him and he said, if you go find one of the cards, find one of the Provisions, because I didn't, have any with me. He's like, I'll sign it. So I went digging through all these boxes and found a Jordan card, which I'll share here. I've had it sitting here. So this is probably one of my favorite cards in my collection. And so when we started this podcast, we put a list together of people, and Terry was at the absolute top of this list for me to reach out to have on the show. And so I sent him a message and, heard back and was absolutely thrilled that he responded and just so appreciative. So that's a little backstory of how we're here today. And I know Joe's super excited. He's a graphic designer and a fan of the artwork of sports cards. And so we're just thrilled again. So Joe, anything you want to add?
No, man, it was a great intro, and I am very excited to get to talk about some early basketball, 1990s basketball cards, where we did see a lot of illustration, right, throughout a lot of these decks and a lot of these packs. And so it's going to be an absolute thrill to dive deeper on the Provision set and see where that conversation takes us.
Yeah. So Terry, do you want to? I know a little bit about your background just from watching other interviews, but do you want to share a little bit about where you went to school? And I know you played basketball in college. And
yeah, sure. Yeah. So I guess where will I start? Yeah, I did. I attended Stanford out here, on the West Coast. When I started, it was the Pac-8, and it just turned into the Pac-10, and now it's the Pac-12. But yeah, I was on a basketball scholarship at Stanford. But I always had a love and appreciation for art. Growing up, I collected cards and comic books, loved watching cartoons and playing with toys and collecting Hot Wheels and all that kind of stuff. So, I was just a big kid. And even when I was in college, I was still a big kid. I still loved all that stuff. So, when it came to cards, I'd always collected primarily, basketball cards, which, back when I was collecting, you have to go back into the mid early 60s. Everybody else was collecting baseball. So for me to find basketball cards, A, was hard. B, to find anybody to trade with and have fun with. There were very few people that bought basketball cards. So one of the things that, when I got started, at that time, the only cards that were really being, put together, Donruss had, I guess, their Diamond Visions. And, Upper Deck, I think, was starting to play around with a little bit of art on cards as well. I think there was an artist name. I want to say Vernon Davis. I could be wrong with that name, but he was doing like some baseball images. But they were all traditional, meaning that sports art used to be, hey, here's a headshot of a guy, and then a couple of action shots kind of mixed in, and that was sports art. And I wanted to do something different. So again, with my background and all the stuff I was doing, I started creating images that would be, I imagined you're doing an issue number 1 of a comic book, and trying to do something a little more interesting. what kind of things would I have wanted as a kid, to kind of collect. And if you think about it, the athletes, they were becoming superheroes. So if you think about it from a cultural standpoint, in the 50s, it was movie stars, they were kind of the cultural icons. And as you start to move from the 50s into the 60s, you began to get this transition from movie stars to music. So now you're getting Elvis, you're getting kind of these music, and so they became the icons. And then by the time you got to kind of the mid 80s and you're moving to the 90s, all of a sudden the athletes. And so to me, I wanted images that represented from a pop culture standpoint, kind of how I thought, fans and people who followed, their athletes that they love, kind of how did they view them? And so that's kind of what led to it. And I sent some images off to, I think to Topps and Fleer and some of the other companies at the time. At that time, I think there were only 3 companies. It was Topps, Donruss, and Fleer. And just to say, hey, if you're going to do something interesting, hey, I would, if I'm a kid, I'd want to buy something like this. Nothing happened for, I don't think I heard back from anybody. And then about 2 years later, Fleer was sold. And one of the VPs, I guess my stuff was in his predecessor's desk. And so he called me and go, hey, you want to do this for us? I said, sure. So that's how, the whole Provision line got started. But, as far as the bio goes, it was, as an athlete, and then setting up companies that do, my company does logos and paintings and video games and all that kind of stuff. But back in that day, that's kind of how my art led me, kind of to what became the Provision line.
Yeah. And did that artwork come before the Sharks logo? I know that's like a iconic logo. It's one of the best sports logos of all time. And I know in the 90s, like everybody was, there was kids in Cleveland, Ohio wearing Sharks stuff. It's just one of those teams. So did that come as a result of like working with Fleer?
No, actually, again, like I said, there are a lot of people, people who know that I do sports stuff don't know I do video game stuff, and people who know I do sports paintings didn't know I did logos and all that kind of stuff. So, no, the Sharks logo came about. I was out here in the Bay Area. There was a group that was going to move because they used to be, the Sharks at one time were the Minnesota North Stars, right? And so they moved them out here. They split the Minnesota North Stars in 2. Half the guys went to what was going to become, Barry hockey, which turned into the Sharks, and the other half ended up in Dallas, which is, that's why Dallas is still the Stars. They kind of kept the North Star part of it anyway. But now if somebody asked me to speak at a conference, on sports marketing, and I happened to have, a bunch of my other paintings, and I was talking about, different approaches to sports marketing. And again, just like we talked about what sports art was, kind of traditionally, all the stuff that I do, none of it was traditional. We were kind of, we were doing very innovative things because that's, kind of what I believed in. So the Sharks logo, the guys approached me afterwards, said, have you ever done any logos? I said, yeah. And they said, well, would you consider doing this? And I said, yeah. And they were going to have a contest. And I said, well, I really, I'm not interested in being a contest. I'm interested, if you want to pay me to do it, I'll do it, but I'm not going to just, do a contest. So long story short, they did the contest, right? But what they didn't tell people when they were doing the contest is they were already paying me to design the logo and stuff. And at the time, what was interesting about that whole process was at the time, NHL properties didn't exist. So for those of you who are familiar with how sports work, there's NFL properties, NBA properties, Major League Baseball properties, and they control all the licensing. So if you're using logos and uniforms and all that kind of stuff, there's a fee that has to be paid, and all the owners split the revenue from licensing. And then, there's a separate organization, the Players Association. So if you're doing something that involves players and teams and logos and all that kind of stuff, that's why on all your cards, you're going to see, officially licensed by the leagues and also the Players Association. But when we first started doing when we did the shark stuff, I guess it was 35 years ago, there was no NHL properties. So that meant when the Sharks logo came out, nobody could have predicted the success. You mentioned they were buying it in Cleveland. Well, what happened is they were buying it all over the world. It became the number 2 selling logo worldwide only behind the Chicago Bulls. The power of Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
Still back then. But they made so much money. And again, like I said, that meant that the Sharks got all that money. It wasn't split. And so not soon after, all of a sudden, NHL properties exist. Because they, again, we were doing something that was very different. I was creating stuff to sell merchandise, to sell apparel. We introduced some new colors. It was very non-traditional as far as hockey goes. The people at the NHL were in an uproar, right? Here, somebody's created a logo and a mark that is taking the main tool of their trade, the hockey stick, and having it bitten in half, right? So
and
it was
and bold colors too, like with the turquoise and stuff.
But people have to realize back then, again, hockey still, even today, they struggle television wise, but hockey made their money on putting butts in the seats. They also made their money in terms of any kind of licensing and merchandising was made on what was sold in the local market. It's not what it is today. And so, what I was looking at, even when we started designing, think about it. How many teams in the States, what was the furthest team west? Well, you had the Kings in LA, but after that, I don't know, was it Chicago? I mean, what was the furthest team? There were no hockey teams, west of the Mississippi or whatever. So what I was looking at is, from a design perspective, I know both of you guys dabble in that area, is who's my audience? What are they going to respond to? We know if they're going to be buying stuff in the local market, I have to be designing stuff for the local market. So my focus was I needed something. And again, how many people in California were playing hockey, right? So we had to create something. If I'd done something with Sharp, but there's no hockey stick, they're not going to know what it is. They don't even know the sport. The other side of it, I was looking, okay, it's going to have to be a younger demographic, because, older people, especially in Northern California, yeah, we have a lot of transplants, but, people who've been here for a long time, they didn't grow up with hockey. So I knew that, again, the way hockey was played, it's an exciting sport, but it's going to be, it's going to have a younger appeal. So I started focusing more on the surf and skateboard culture, in California. I started focusing on those colors. I started focusing on the kind of thing, again, that would appeal to a younger audience and an audience that was going to be new to a sport. So one thing led to another. So most people are familiar with what the logo looks like. We've since updated it from the original one. So I did both the original one, and then we updated it, I think it was maybe 10 or 12 years later, to what it is now.
Oh, nice.
But what it did do was it changed how the NHL thought about marketing its sport. And it changed how people in sports, if they were savvy enough, thought about how they're going to design their logos. And how much money and just overall, I guess the best word is how do you get eyeballs on your team? So the Sharks were selling merchandise all over the world months before the team even played a game. And so what it did is it made people rethink just strategically. I designed not necessarily to represent an area or a team or things like that, but I was just trying to design something, and again, couldn't have predicted the success, but trying to design something that would generate revenue. Because think about it, their ability to sign players and all that kind of stuff, it wasn't television money, right? It was putting butts in the seats, and then again, each team owned their own stuff, so the more money they could make, the better they could say and sign in terms of their roster. And if you go back and look at the Sharks early years, they needed help.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting too, like as I think about like logos or even uniform design today, you see a lot of the fans in the stands wearing the old jerseys or like hats with like, the throwback logos. And I feel like a lot of teams today, you know, we're here to talk about sports cards, but like I love all this stuff too, and it's like this is awesome. This is part of your background. So I know Joe's loving it too, being a graphic designer. So, but like a lot of the jerseys and uniforms are just becoming very generic now. Like if you look at baseball, especially, I feel it's just like a gray jersey with a simple font of their city, and they're kind of like losing. How many navy and gray uniforms can you have in Major League Baseball? And so some of those iconic logos and designs just aren't there anymore. I feel, I don't know, they're getting distorted in a weird way.
Well, again, what you have to realize, if you start a team today, the Sharks logo would not exist if by today's standards. In other words, back then the people who were starting the team contacted me. I was working with them, and they were giving me a lot of freedom and flexibility to create something unique for them. Nowadays, everything is handled by the leagues. So teams can pick their names and they can try to go out and find people, but ultimately the leagues, have final say. The leagues have design departments and they try to influence it. If you look at uniforms, like all the NBA uniforms, they don't get the design. Nike, right? Nike designs them all. And the same thing, you got Fanatics coming in, you got all this stuff. So everything now is so corporate, it's so controlled that's part of what you're seeing is everything is, everything. It's like if all the designs were done by one designer, where's the innovation? Where's the stuff that's going to look different? How are people going to stand out? It all looks the same because it's all being designed, okayed and designed from, one central point of view. So, when the Sharks first came out, if it had gone to the league, there's no way they would have ever allowed it. They didn't like it. They thought that the team was crazy for doing it. The colors are bad. They hated it. So again, when it comes to what you're seeing, today, when I look at uniforms and I look at team, logo designs and all that kind of stuff, that kind of innovation, I'm just not seeing it, and there's a definite reason why. The other thing, again, even on the Shark stuff, a lot of times, teams will, focus test and all kinds of stuff like that. And so from a designer standpoint, you guys can probably relate to this. And that is if you take a design and you put it in front of focus groups, and then people come back to you and say, okay, here's what we found out in the focus group. What happens is, you end up moving towards this, weird space where it's like, it doesn't appeal to anybody, right?
Yeah.
So, you're trying to appeal to too many people instead of, just creating something that, your gut tells you is right. Anytime you're working on art, the way I view art or anything I'm doing creatively is how do you create an emotional connection between you and the people who are going to be looking at your project. So if you think about it, the Sharks logo was designed to, the fact that it's diving, at an angle through a triangle, create a sense of motion. The idea of biting the hockey stick. The logo tells a story. And you can't say that about most logos. They don't tell you anything. There's nothing, And now we're also getting into these esoteric names, right? So, we're gonna be the Sun or the Jazz or it's like give me something I can work with.
Yeah. No, I feel like a thing Joe and I talk about it on one of our episodes. We talk about like modern insert card designs of like missed opportunities is a theme that we kind of see in some of the modern card design, and that's kind of, you see as a designer, you probably see like so much potential in so many directions that you could have taken something to push, a design, and it just seems like it's safe. A lot of stuff is safe that you see.
Well, think about it this way, right? So right now, Panini has exclusive with NBA and NFL, right? So what did we just talk about, right? One central, and what I think they have 25 SKUs.
Yeah, it's a lot of products they have.
Well, so you've got there's going to be, a lead designer, somebody at the top who's basically going, okay, this is why. And now you got 25 versions of that same stuff. And okay, we're going to put more foil on this one. We're going to do, more color borders on this one. We're going to, how many, for me, I like where the industry was, years ago when, a guy has one rookie card. So we'll get into our card talk here.
Yeah.
A guy has
Yeah.
one rookie card. Right now, how many rookie cards would somebody like Zion or somebody have, right? There's probably 200 rookie cards.
Yeah.
Yep.
So when you get into things like that, you kind of, the hobby stalls. When you don't have, when you have one company now that literally controls everything, you're not going to get innovation.
Right.
Competition breeds innovation. And so when if there are multiple people doing it, they're going to be trying different things and new things. But right now, when it comes to, licenses and being able to do it and all that kind of stuff, like I said, we're just at this point in time where, from a creative standpoint, it's just getting more and more difficult for people like me who like to do stuff that's different, to be able to get those opportunities, just because, just the way it works now. So
yeah,
I'm hopeful that, we'll see what happens. Fanatics, in 2024 or whatever.
Yeah, a couple years.
They'll take over the card business. So let's see what they do.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do, because I feel like if you talk to a lot of people at shows, or even other people on YouTube channels, it seems like people are getting sick of all of the just colored variations, and it's a reason I think people go back to like vintage cards. People are, Mickey Mantle cards are always going to be collectible. Kareem cards, but like Kareem didn't have 20 colored rookie cards. He has his rookie card, and that's why it's still iconic today.
Yeah. Well, again, think about it this way. Again, Provisions were some of the early insert cards, right?
Mm-hmm.
They were some of the first, if not the first, where we were trying to do something different. So an insert card was special. What's special about a rare variant when all you're doing is changing the color of the border? Right. How innovative, how exciting is that? So, the idea of doing something new and different, again, this comes down to production and, ways to make money very quickly and cheaply, without, putting much effort into it. But there's nothing exciting about it, when it comes to, giving people choices, and more importantly, giving people something creative and fun and new. Collecting used to be about fun. And what we're seeing now is it's about money and getting cards graded. One of the things I actually appreciate about the Provision, those particular cards that they came in, I remember the baseball ones from '91. I mean, those are those awful yellow borders.
Yeah.
So the cards themselves were ugly as all get up. And now you have this, these kind of black bordered special cards in them. But they're not very expensive, but people still love them. They still have fun with them. You can find them. They're and that's what's kind of fun about it. And that they really kind of, for me, represent what the hobby was all about. Having fun. Most of the people I talked to who were in your age were picking those things up when they were kids, and they still remember them fondly. And that's what it was all about. And today, think about, what are they going to remember today?
Right.
Oh, I got the one with the pink border, and and the some kind of weird crack
zebra print. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's so much that you said there, that I feel like when you have so much of something, then nothing is special, right? Like, yeah. I collect and drink whiskey, and it's like at some point I just was like, all right, I have too much, right? Because then nothing is special. It's like you have so much. And that's the same way with sports cards. And like, so here's the baseball one that the Dwight Gooden, and this is the one that started it all, right? This was the first painting.
Yeah, that was the one that I sent in. I did that painting and then sent it in. So that was the the painting that was sent in, and to folks to say, hey, this is what I would do. And again, what I wanted to show with that was, when we think about our athletes, especially as kids, we know the nicknames. We know who they are. We know what they are. We kind of know what they represent to us. So, at that time, Gooden was, the best pitcher in baseball. Dude threw heat. He had a curveball, but he had velocity on a curveball, which, and it was a wicked curveball at that. And so the idea, and so as a kid and people watching it, they knew, right? So coming up with nicknames for the guys and then coming up with an image that would represent kind of what you thought about when you thought about that athlete. So that painting was called Flamethrower. And, it's obvious, you get it when you see it. And it's just kind of fun. And that's kind of what I tried to do with a lot of the work that I was doing. I always wanted to pay respect to the athletes, which means I wanted to show the athletes, in a good light. So, for example, I know when Fleer started doing them later with other artists, they started what I call putting the guys like in costumes, right? So, for example, Ozzie Smith, the Wizard. I never would have put Ozzie Smith in a wizard hat and coat and all. Again, that to me was degrading to him. I would have found a way to create something magical, a ball and have something there. But he would have been in his uniform. He wouldn't have been goofy. I wouldn't have put him in other stuff, that kind of stuff. So what I saw after, because I only did him for a year or so, but when I saw him, I go, they didn't get it. They didn't get what my original concept was when I created the line for them. And that was, it was to pay homage to the athletes, respect the athletes, but be clever about the images you were creating. They were more kind of these, what I call sports fantasy portraits, and not, kind of cartoons. And that's where they started to go on a number of the images. It was a different style, a different artist, and all that kind of stuff. But, I tried to continue that, on the new stuff. So, I hadn't done any painting when I saw you at the show. I hadn't painted for 25 years. I was busy, art directing video games, and I had some deals at some movie studios, and, I was doing other things, logos and all kinds of stuff, other products. But I hadn't been doing any paintings for a while. And I got called from somebody who, had an athlete that was doing something. It was Jared Goff. And they wanted me to do a piece for Jared. The Rams had just gotten to the Super Bowl. So I did a painting. It was the first one I'd done in 20 years. And I said, 20, 25 years. I said, let me start painting again. And so that's what you see on Imaginary Ink. And that's what you saw at the show. What I wanted to try to do, hopefully as an artist, you get better over time. I also used to paint traditionally, and now the way everything's worked, I had to teach myself to paint digitally. But I still wanted my paintings to look the same as when I was painting on illustration boards. So it took a little while to figure out how to do that and all that kind of stuff. And so that's what you're seeing on Imaginary Ink and what you saw there, the LeBron and a number of, I think I did 14 or 15 paintings, last year. And then those, people can see NBA. And then I started branching out. I'm starting to get requests, and I usually didn't do requests, but, every now and then. So I just finished a Tyson for somebody and things like that. I don't do them very often because I'm pretty slammed, but I am at least painting again. And I'm hoping to, get started again here in the next month or two and try to crank out a few more. And they're just, again, to have fun, but to maintain that same, what I call sports fantasy. So all the images will tell a story. So if people go to that site and they look at the LeBron, it tells a story. If you look at the Zion, it tells a story. So the paintings all have their fun names. And then there's the story that goes behind it. And that's kind of the fun in it.
Do you ever, Joe, I know you brought up, did you ever work with any of the athletes, like during the Provisions line or on the current stuff? Like, do they have input, like, in your process?
No, again, I've worked with plenty of athletes over the years, but when I'm doing stuff like that for Provision, the Provision line, no, I'm not working with the athletes. I'm coming up with stuff, and the way that it, again, you have to look at it the way it worked back then in terms of approvals and all that kind of stuff. It wasn't the same as it is today. The fun thing for me is, most of the athletes, when they saw them, they really liked them. So I might run into I hadn't been to a card show in probably 35 years. The last time I was at a card show would have been like 92. Fleer wanted me there in a booth signing stuff. And it was fun then because I'm signing stuff and, the athletes are coming up and wanting me to sign stuff for them. And some of them were there, with other companies. So it's some funny stories where they would send somebody over and say, hey, so-and-so wants to meet you in the hallway, right? Because they can't be seen at the Fleer booth, right?
Yeah.
So so I'd go over, I'd grab a stack of cards and he'd sign some for me and I'd sign some for him. So I got this whole collection of cards that, where I signed some for the athlete and they signed them for me. And I just threw them in my collection. But most of the athletes appreciated what I was doing because it was fun. It was fun for them.
That might have to be next on my collection of getting a whole set autographed by you and the players on the card. Would probably take the rest of my life to try to complete, but would be pretty cool. Joe, you were saying something?
Oh, I was curious about, any unsolicited feedback that you had gotten from the athletes. And it sounds like it was more or less very positive. Again, due in no small part to how you approached the project, like you detailed, right? Compared to that 91 set versus the 93 set and so on.
Yeah. Yeah. But, you'll always hear stuff that gets back. So, I know Ronnie a lot because he and I go all the way back to high school. He's from the LA area. We played against each other in high school. Most people don't know. I was on a basketball scholarship, but when Ronnie first came up, Ronnie played on the USC. They know him playing on the USC football team. Ronnie also played on the USC basketball team.
No kidding.
Oh, wow.
Which, he played on for a year and then he concentrated on football. But I know that Ronnie doesn't like his card has him split, right? Mm-hmm. He's half Raider and half Niner, So I've heard from people he won't sign that card. So, I've never talked to him about it, but I know. So, one of these days when he and I run into each other again, I know I'm going to give him some grief about, hey, dude, why don't you sign that card for people?
Yeah.
I'm sure.
It's
we got some grief on, remember that Mark McGuire card?
Yep. With his bat over the shoulder.
With the American flag. So when we did that piece, I remember there's actually two different versions of that because I did another version for Diamond Marks of that, and at that time the A's were really good, and so were the Giants. The Giants had Will Clark, so in the Bay Area, Will Clark was known for the eye black. He always wore it. Mark didn't like the fact I put eye black on him. So when we did the second version, I had to take the eye black off him. We also, on the flag, I remember somebody sent something because Fleer called me and I laughed about it. But, again, I'm using graphic representations and symbols. So, the idea behind the Mark McGuire piece, again, was, All-American, right? He was a great player at SC. He was an All-American, all that kind of stuff. Apple pie, baseball, that kind of bit. So I use that kind of a graphic design to represent the flag. Well, in my graphic design, I put the stars, the way I want them. It's just a graphic. But somebody wrote in because on the flag, the stars aren't, tilted. They're straight and down. So you'll get all kinds of stuff that comes back to you. It was interesting because right when that card came out, it became very popular because right at the time that was being issued, the Gulf War started. Right. So we had all this patriotism and all that kind of stuff. So all of a sudden that card for a month or two was like super hot because everybody wanted it because it had the flag on it, had Mark McGuire on it. So, these things always run their course. But when you are working on paintings and you're starting them, it was funny because also like on the Joe Montana, what ended Joe's career with the Niners was that hit he took against the Giants where he messed up his shoulder. Well, that painting was done before that hit took place. Yep. And then, the Michael Jordan piece was done years before Space Jam. So, people always had fun going back and looking at the paintings and stuff I was doing. And if they don't know when I did them, they think like Space Jam, right? With Jordan. They think, oh, you did that because of space. No, that was done years before.
Yep. Or Barry Bonds too.
Yeah, the Barry Bonds one, the one that's the controversial one. When I say controversial one, most people don't know it exists, and that was the one I did for Diamond Marks. And when you go back and if you find that image, I was treating Barry like Frankenstein. So there's kind of this ball, there's this liquid that's being, going into his arm and all that kind of stuff. And obviously, it's pre-steroid. But I guarantee you, Barry probably won't sign that card if anybody puts it in front.
You're almost like the Simpsons predicting the future. They always say it's like you're predicting sports future here with
So that was kind of a running joke with a number of people who were familiar with my paintings. They were going, "Yeah, all this stuff you do a painting and then it comes true."
That's funny.
Well, again, I think there's a massive amount of creative insight, right, that's going into these works, and sometimes life gives us some fun, coincidences like that, right, with the Mark McGwire card. But it makes sense as a standalone card too, right? Of course, right? As a Barry Bonds. I'm sorry, excuse me, as a Barry Bonds card with what like you were describing. It makes sense in a standalone way, and it's fun when those end up dovetailing with real life. But again, want to reemphasize the amount of thought and creativity and the approach that you're taking, with these cards. Again, not just settling for that surface level Ozzie Smith Wizards outfit, right? What's that extra layer underneath that really gets conceptually to the heart of the athlete, and that really holds up the test of time.
Yeah, and what you want to do, like I said, you're telling a story. It's a moment in time. So for example, again, most people still, when they see the Nolan Ryan card, all they see is the smoke coming off the baseball, right? Because he was, the strikeout king, right? And so when you see that particular card, I've got Ryan kind of giving you that stare down that he used to do, right? Mr. Intensity there. And then he's holding a ball and you see the smoke coming off the ball. Well, the smoke is in the number 7 because he had thrown 7 no-hitters. And then the smoke rising above the 7 is starting to form an 8. And the question is, would he throw an 8? And so on a lot of those pieces, if you look at them closely on the Bo Jackson football card, there's a full moon behind him. But the full moon is a baseball, right?
Oh, wow. I never noticed that.
See, again, yeah. And so when I'm doing these kinds of things, like I said, the whole idea is to tell stories. And even though, like I said, I'm mentioning this to you, here it is, 35, 40 years later. And you go, I never noticed that.
Yeah.
But in most of the paintings, there is some, there's some story there. There's some little element there. Like I said, I'm mentioning the Nolan Ryans. Now people will look and go, I saw the smoke, and maybe they saw the 7, but they didn't realize there's an 8 being formed as well. And so the fun part of me working on some of the newer paintings for basketball, it was, doing stuff where, again, continuing that storytelling. So the LeBron painting has, a basketball with wings flying through a court, which was interesting because, again, when I do stuff like that, now everything's got to be approved. Back in the day, it didn't. So now, the Players Association will come and go, we won't let you use that. So I'll have to put up arguments and all kinds of stuff to be able to be creative. And, it's frustrating at times, but, it's just the way it is now. So, I think that hopefully people will have fun, looking at that kind of stuff and going back and looking at some of the old stuff and finding some of the hidden stuff in them and some of the meanings. And usually I'll hint at it in the name, usually. Some of them are more obvious, like the Frank Thomas was Time Bomb. And, and that was real obvious. There's a time bomb. There's a big bomb and a bat that it becomes transparent on the end. I think with Will Clark, the swing there, he was, breaking the baseball. So I think that some of this stuff, some of them were very obvious, and then some of them were much more subtle.
We'll have to have people comment. Hopefully, if this gets views and people can comment the Easter egg that they see in the card. But that's awesome. I did not notice. I've had this Bo Jackson for a few months now, and never noticed the moon. I've noticed that there was a moon, but never noticed it was a baseball. So that's really cool.
Yeah.
Terry, what size did you work at for the Provisions artwork? You had mentioned that was a process where you were going direct to canvas. Was it a large canvas or one that was maybe a little bit smaller?
Yeah, the way. Yeah, so again, a lot of times the guys that were doing cards, were doing them small because they knew they're going to be on 2x3 cards. My paintings, there were three different sizes: 30 by 40 inches, which is huge.
Yeah.
20 by 30, which is what most of them were, and then every now and then I might do a few that were 15 by 20. But I purposely painted larger because I knew it was going to reduce down.
Right.
And I did all of the originals were done by hand on illustration board. I don't, because I'm in my home office. The originals are at my other office. If I'd been there, I could have brought out some originals to show you. I'm trying to think if I got any originals here. I don't think I have any at the house. Anyway, yeah. So I paint large, 20 by 30. 30 by 40 and 20 by 15. I painted on illustration board, on cold press. My process was I would draw pencil drawing on the illustration board. I would then, to do the provisions, I would take a picture of my pencil drawing and I would send that to Fleer so they would know what I was doing. They gave me, complete control over it, but at least this is the way they saw what I was doing. Yeah. And then from there, I was using acrylic inks, and I painted like you would a watercolor. So I would, start painting on top of the piece. And so when I was done, it looked like a watercolor. I would then come back because I wanted to hide my brushstrokes. See, a lot of people would think I painted on top of photographs or all kinds of stuff. Nobody knows how I work. But I would paint them like a watercolor, and then I would come back. And the reason I worked on cold press is I came back with an airbrush, and I would airbrush over my acrylic watercolor type paintings. This allowed me to hide all my brushstrokes and allowed me to, I was using, at the time, they were Schminky Aero colors, which are these super intense, vibrant inks. That's why the pieces were so colorful, is I wanted color. And these were just concentrated color. And again, I would spray that on top. So that means, again, old school. This is before computers and all, right? Yeah. You're cutting, for those of you who don't know, you would put down something called frisket. So think of it as like these big sheets of clear Scotch tape. And you would put that over your painting. And you're using cold press so that wouldn't pull up the paper on the board. You then have to take an X-Acto blade and cut around the shape that you want to paint with the airbrush. That way you don't get any overspray.
Cut it free.
And then you'd peel that section out, and then I'd go in with my airbrush and paint that section. So that was that whole process. You kind of get this whole painting done. Then I put frisket on top, and every time I'm changing colors or changing sections I'm working on, I got to put down a new piece of frisket and cut around it. And after I finished with all that, and I was using that primarily to, again, get rid of my brush strokes, but then also do my backgrounds. That's how I could get those nice, clean fades and color transitions. And then when that was done, I would go back in and paint again to pull all the detail back out that by putting the airbrush over it, I would have lost. So to bring back the contrast, and then I would come back in and, again, this is old school. So if you look at that Montana, the background looks like a blueprint. Well, that blueprint was created by masking off Montana once he was all done, airbrushing that blue background. And then when you look at it, it looks like a blueprint because there's like dots and stuff in it. Well, that was done by dipping a toothbrush in blue ink and then flicking it with my thumb all over the place to create that speckled pattern to make it look like a blueprint. So when I was painting these, this is all old school stuff. See, your audience today, they're thinking about computers, and they would just do that in 2 seconds, right? And I'm saying, no, this all was done by hand, all done old school methods, toothbrushes, paintbrushes, the images and some of the stuff on that Joe Montana, I would then go back in with colored pencil, and that's how I got the lines in the hair. Some of the stuff to make it look like it was a blueprint, where you're writing on it. So, all these different techniques to create a variety of different looks.
Well, it's crazy too. Like I love the Montana one because I mean, as I mentioned to you, I work in architecture, in marketing, and even your detail of how you have like the words written are as you would see on a blueprint. It's the same architectural lettering that you learn in school and taking, construction and architecture classes. It's really
correct. Yeah. So here's what I did on that, because I can't write like that. So I have a friend of my wife who was an architect school, and so I said, I need you to write. Here's what I want you to write on here, and she didn't want to write on the painting, and I said, nah, just do it. So I think that's the only piece where there's somebody else that contributed to the actual work. But it was I had a woman who she was I guess she ended up being the maid of honor at our wedding. But that's actually her writing on there and not mine, because I could not write like an architect. It's funny that you noticed that, but that's again paying attention to those little details. If I had written it, it wouldn't have looked right. But I know how architects, write, and I wanted it to look like a blueprint.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to share that story with my friend Aaron. He was my old boss at the first architecture firm I worked at, and we actually went to the National together last year. But his flight, he left the day, like earlier that day when I met you. And so when I sent him the picture of you and I, he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, I missed that. And because he's older than me, but he like loves these cards as well. So he'll appreciate that story, being an architect and hearing about that.
But, it's paying attention to the little details. And the fun thing about the new paintings is now that I'm painting digitally. So back then, part of the reason, I painted so large was so I could do the details. So if you're looking at that Montana piece, you're seeing, individual hair and all that kind of stuff. So again, if you're working small, then it's out of proportion. I could get a small brush, but it's still, it needs to be thin to look right in proportion to everything else. Or if you're putting in the dots on the jersey and the mesh and things like that. Well, one of the things, because I really didn't want to work digitally, but one of the things that I found I like about working digitally is I can zoom in.
Yes.
So the first paintings I did were too detailed. In other words, I wanted them to look. So if you're looking at my new stuff and my old stuff, I didn't want you to be able to tell the difference. And the first ones I started to do, I was able to get in and I was able to put in too much detail. So they looked even more photorealistic than I wanted. And they had more detail, so they didn't match what I'd done before. So it is fun to be able to, yeah. So we get to the new ones, yeah. So, but it also meant, again, because of the way I used to paint, and knowing the tricks I used to use to, paint real, I'm able to bring a lot of that to my digital work. So that Curry one you just held up, coming up with ways to create the illusion of water inside of a basketball and all that kind of stuff. Now, I wanted to paint those things. What most people would do today digitally, right, is they go into Photoshop and they grab photos and they doctor them. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to be able to do what I'd always done, paint and draw them.
Yep.
And which meant I wasn't going for, realism. What I was going for is representation. Yeah. So if I wanted real water, you can make it look like real water, but that's not the way I would have painted it back then, nor do I want to do it now. How do I create some kind of stylized version, of water that creates the illusion that I was trying to create?
Yep.
And so, because I'm one of those people that says, hey, if you want photorealism, use a camera. So that's another reason why I'm always trying to create stuff that, because people look at it, oh, that looks real. And I'll go, nah, even when I'm painting the guys, they're more caricatures than they are, these photorealistic renderings of them. Because you guys know today, I mean, you could get all the pores, right, every single hair, and that's just not what I do. What I do is meant to be more kind of fun, more kind of lighthearted and more representational. And that's what extends over to for those people that see the small stars, the new figures that we do. They are caricatures of NBA athletes, not meant to be, realistic.
Yeah, after you and I talked about being on here, and I have the Zion one with the black bordered prints. I went online and I found a LeBron one, so I ordered it. I hope my wife doesn't hear it, but anyway, she will hear this. So I bought a LeBron small stars, and then I opened it and I got the white border ones, but it's the exact same prints that were in it. So I have now the black of Zion, Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, and Vince Carter. So it's kind of cool to have both versions of those as somebody that needs to collect them.
I'll tell you how that came about. So the black border versions, when we did small stars, we did a test, and the black border versions were tested at Walmart, and we didn't make very many of those. I want to say there might be maybe around 5,000 of each figure, and that was it. And if you bought those, they have the black borders in them. Everything else after that is going to have all the ones that are going to be at Walmart's and all that kind of stuff now are going to have white borders, and then there will be some variant borders in there too. That's one of the things that Walmart wanted, so that stuff will start going on. But if for people who are listening, if you do have the black border ones, those are the rarer ones because we didn't make that many of them. The other thing to note on that is when the small, again, we didn't put we couldn't put stats or any of that kind of stuff on because we weren't allowed from our licensing perspective. But that Ja Morant and that Zion, those were done during their rookie years. So if people ever do consider those, the mini prints cards, or people start collecting them, and they start figuring it out, those are first year, cards for those guys if they consider them cards. And the beauty of that is, to some extent, there are far fewer of those because, again, they're randomly placed amongst, all the, 12 different or 11 different players. There are far fewer of those than there are.
his Prism base rookie card.
Yeah, the cards that people are chasing. So that was another thing I wanted to do is I didn't tell anybody they were in there.
They're in the side that you.
Yeah, nobody knows they're in there. So when you were at the show, that's where you found out, and that's where most people find out because most people that bought them and found them, there weren't very many of them. So when people did find them, and they bought them, they didn't open them. So I bet you most of the people, again, if they found them at Walmart, if they were lucky enough to find those early ones, they probably have never opened them. There's no there's no way to tell if you got one of the earlier ones or not. You'd have to open it to find out. Because the packaging is the same, how it was put in is the same, all that stuff. The new figures coming in are going to have, there'll only be one mini print instead of two. There are 4 different variations for each player. And then there are also color variations of the figure itself. So you can get them in a regular uniform, and then there are numbered and rare versions of the figures, solid team colors. So, for example, if you find Trey, and you're lucky enough, you can buy Trey in his Hawks red uniform. But if you see him on the shelves, there'll be an all red version, an all white version, and an all gold version. So every player has versions of him in his team color, and the colors are one's common, one's uncommon, and one's rare.
Wow.
So you can see it. So if you see it on the shelf, if you see one of the color ones, when they start shipping, grab them. Curry and LeBron should be hitting the shelves sometime in the next probably 60 to 90 days. So in LeBron, you'll see that there's a gold one, a purple one, and a white one. And then Curry, there's what do we do with Curry? I think there's a gold version, a blue version, and I don't know if there's a gray version or a white version as well. So there'll be some fun stuff that people can chase down. And then I'm trying to work on some new paintings so we can get some new I can put some new mini prints of some of the younger players, start to, that people are going to want, LaMelo and Anthony Edwards and Zach LaVine. So hopefully I can get some of the new paintings done.
Very cool. If Fanatics came knocking to, revitalize the although Provisions is owned by Upper Deck, and I think you had mentioned one time before when I talked to you that they kind of reintroduced Provisions in hockey a few years ago. But if Fanatics comes knocking, would you do cards again with them?
Yeah, I would think about it again. I know, I was approached by, Upper Deck a while back when they bought Fleer and they wanted to bring back, but people can go look at the hockey Provision cards that the Upper Deck put out. And, when I talk about, people not understanding the concept, it's very clear when you see the versions that they did.
I looked them up after you mentioned, and it's
they don't even look like Provisions, do they?
No, it's like a weird photoshopped photo with just randomness. There was like a guy with a hawk, and he's like in the woods, and
So, and that's what I'm saying is that again, when you're an artist, when you're doing these things, again, there's a reason, there's a philosophy, there's a design sense about the things that I do. And so for people like that, Provisions are just kind of these crazy. No, that's not what it was. And then the execution wasn't very good. So you have to have quality execution, a good idea, and then again present it very well, and stand the test of time. So yeah, if I'd love to do stuff again. And part of the reason I started doing those pieces for Imaginary Ink is I was getting people that wanted to see work again. But more importantly, I wanted people, if companies like Upper Deck or other people were going to, bring back Provisions, I didn't want people to think I did those. You know what I mean? I didn't want them to think that was my art or those were my ideas. So part of the reason I started Imaginary Ink was so they could see, no, Terry Smith is still alive and I'm still doing, the kind of work that I do, and this is my work. So, if you see Provisions or you see some of this stuff, maybe even, like I said, even there's still a lot of people that don't know that different artists did, the later Provisions, but, those concepts, again, as we're talking about it, philosophically, that's not what I did and that's not what it was about. So that's why I want people to see the new stuff. So if you see Kawhi, that piece is Man or Machine, on the site. And when you see that, what you'll see, and again, it's real subtle and I don't think you can see it on the site, but when you see the original, he is part robot. So what you do see when you look at that is you see his arm and remember the Bo Jackson baseball piece where I had like the little circuitry inside the arm.
Yep.
So I actually said, okay, let me redo that. But I did it with Kawhi in his shoulder. But then what you can't see is if you zoom in on one of the eyes, and I don't think you'll be able to see it on the site because it's not going to get enough detail. But he's got like a robotic eye as well.
Oh, very cool.
And then you see the ball, breaking into, it's like in VR, it's computer generated and it's starting to break into pixels. So, with all of those, the Zion, it's raw power, and he's sitting there crushing the balls, right? And there's nothing but balls all around him, crushed balls. And he's just, got two in each hand, squeezing them. So it was fun to get back to storytelling.
Yeah.
There's the Zion one.
Yeah. And so, that's kind of the fun part of it is those, if I was doing Provision cards today, that's the kind of stuff I would be doing.
Well, this one's cool too. Like the Vince Carter, it's like an hourglass with sand.
Yeah. So the name of that one is, instead of Vinsanity, I took longevity and it's Vingevity. And what I was basically saying there is, and this is kind of an homage to the Barry Bonds piece, right? Is what I had was some liquid. And so the idea, this dude played 22 years. And so what I'm saying, it's like, it's a special elixir. How's he doing it? There's something special in his blood or whatever. But on that piece, look at it closely. The smoke coming off of the ball It's forming 22 to
Oh yeah. Well,
commemorate 22 seasons.
wow.
See, so again, lots of storytelling there.
Yeah.
How he doing it? Is he got some special elixir, some special elixir of life that allows him to play 22 years in the NBA? And that version, it's got the Atlanta Hawk logo behind it, right?
Yeah, like in the background. Yep.
Yeah. So there's another version that we did in the beginning, but they wouldn't let me put it out, and it's got all of the teams that he's played for on the wall behind him. It's super cool. So he has a copy of that.
Oh, nice.
Himself. My son was a trainer. My son was a trainer with the Atlanta Hawks, and he was actually Vince's trainer. So my son grew up. We were collecting cards and all that kind of stuff. A really neat story is that that was one of his heroes, and we collected the cards and all that kind of stuff. And when I was working at EA, I brought Vince into EA, to be, one of the people on their early NBA games. And then we go, here we are, 20 plus years later, 25 years later, and my son ends up being a trainer with the Hawks. And, who's the guy he's taking care of is Vince. And
That's
so
awesome.
Vince is just a super, super guy. And so I did that painting for my son to give to him. And then we ended up turning it, into a Provision an imaginary ink card as well. But I had to change it. But the one that Vince has and the people around that, we gave it to, it commemorates all the teams that he's played for plus his 22 years.
That's awesome. It's a really, really cool story. Like, thank you for sharing that insight. That's awesome. I mean, Vince Carter is like one of the most likable athletes, I think, of all time. Like, everybody loved him. Like, he just transcended your team, your local team. Like, he was one of those people that everybody just was obsessed with.
And I will tell you this, most of the guys, what tends to happen is, the bad boys get all the press, and we tend to hear all the bad stories. We tend to hear all the things that guys do wrong, all that kind of stuff. But most of the athletes, they're good people. They're nice people. A lot of these guys use their celebrity to do all kinds of things in the community that you just never hear about. And for me, it's kind of a privilege and an honor a lot of times to work with the guys. But my son and anybody I work with, the thing I always tell them is, I said, I am never have been or will I ever be in awe of anybody that, athlete or otherwise that I work with, and because of, working in video games and on movie studio lots and, all that kind of stuff, I'm going to meet a lot of people, but I judge people on how they treat you. I said, when I talk to kids and stuff, I said, you can be in awe of what an athlete does on the field, because sometimes what these guys can do physically is just jaw dropping. I said, but don't confuse what they do on the field with who and what they are in real life. How they treat you in real life, that's how you judge them. So respect what they do on the field, appreciate that. You can be in awe of that. But in terms of a person, and when you meet people, how they treat you, if they're super, cool and good to you and all those kind of things, then you can idolize them. Yep. Otherwise, respect what they do on the field. And I say that just to say that most of the guys are good guys. Most of them, it would surprise people, how most of the guys are.
Yeah, my uncle is the head PT for the Red Sox, and so I got to go to a lot of the games. And after they won the division, this past year, we went on the field and everything. It was awesome, and I got to meet Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, all these guys. And Xander Bogaerts was probably one of the nicest people I've ever met. He was my uncle works with him very closely, and he's built a good relationship with him, similar to your son and Vince. But
Yeah.
It was just cool to see him. So I went and got like a Sander Bogarts rookie card after that. After my experience with him, I was like, "Oh, this is cool!" Like he was just very genuine, and it's cool to see that. And I'm sure people like Vince, when they get a piece like from you, they're maybe in awe of the work that you did, and so it's great that can.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I said, most of the time, like I said, it's hard for the average person to realize, what that lifestyle is like, and the demands, uh, just of these guys' time. I mean, think about it this way. You or I can have a bad day, and it really doesn't matter. But when you're in the public eye, you can never have a bad day. And especially in this day and age, with people having their cell phones and taking pictures and recording you. And I mean, if you go out in public, you have to be on. You never, think about a lot of these guys. Can you go to a movie? Can you go to a restaurant? Can you go into the grocery store? I mean, you can't live a normal life if you're one of these big superstars. And even if you're just, a good player in the local market, in a local market, again, people are going to know who you are. So, I think that people just have to realize, how most of these guys know they have to be on. They know that people are watching them, and it's tiring, quite honestly, right? Think about it. If you always have to smile and say hi to everybody and be nice, and people sometimes are being rude, right? You might be in the middle of dinner and they're coming over, and and you want to have a conversation with your wife or your kid. So I don't think people think about that, in the moment, right? So those guys, yeah. So what I tend to do with all these guys is I know what that's like, because I've been around it enough that, quite honestly, I even when I see guys or when I'm doing stuff, or even like I said, my son events and stuff, I just I basically I say, hey, just I'll send something, just give it to him, just and for me, it was a way to say thank you to him, for the way he treated my son, but also the way he treated everybody, right? So sometimes, again, getting stuff to those guys where you don't want anything in return, right? I'm not asking for anything. And the same thing, I don't ask for autographs. I never have. And it was funny. I have friends that collect autographs and all that kind of stuff. But um, I thought about one day all of the different athletes and people I've met. I'm 61 years old, over my 60 years. And I grew up in a family, where I had, uncles that played for the Globetrotters. Sam Jones, who just recently passed away, was my godfather. When the Celtics would come into town, I spent time with Russell and Arbach and Sam Jones, and but that's been my life. I don't have, autographs. It's just the enjoyment was having conversations with those people, talking to those people, hearing their stories. And quite honestly, I'm getting back to cards now. This is what I liked about card collecting when I got into it, and when I had my son, we would go places, but it was to sit and talk. Card shows used to be stuff where, old people like me would sit around and we'd take out cards, but what you're doing is you're talking about this player versus that player. You're talking about a game you saw. You're talking about that guy's accomplishments, and arguing who was better during this era and that era. Money was never part of the conversation, and it was not really part of the experience. But they didn't have the value they have today. And so that's for me trying to figure out, that it'll never be that way again. And I'm talking like an old person reminiscing, but it is what I loved about the hobby. And when I see all the different SKUs and all that kind of stuff, it's moving in a different direction. What I wish they would get back to, what we're going to make one basketball, set a year. We'll make a bunch of them. We'll keep making it, but we're not making 25. That means there's one rookie card of a guy. okay, I get that. And even tops back in the 50s. I mean, okay, so you short print or single print some of them. Okay, that's fine too. But to have all of that, I don't know. For some reason, to me, there's something there where we're missing the fun and
Human
kind of
connection.
the connections and the community that it used to be. And like I said, I'm being reminiscent here, wishing it would be that way, knowing that in real life it won't. But it is what I enjoyed about the hobby and what made me want to contribute.
Yeah. Well, I think too, like I went to one local show at like a VFW before going to the national, and before that, my last show was probably in the '90s when I was like teenager or something, and so I that connection that you're talking about. I always try to go up to the tables and I try to like talk to the person that's like selling the cards and get to know them rather than just like, hey, I'm going to offer you $50 because that's what it is on eBay or Card Ladder. I'm like, you see people that are just like scrolling through their phones and then they say, and it's a transaction. I try to like do it, like walk away from the table and do it and maybe come back. So I'm not just like, but it's just interesting. I like hearing like, how did they get these cards? Or like, there was a guy at the National that had like old programs. So I found one from the year my dad was born of the Indians versus the Red Sox. And it's this cool artwork of like Tower City in Cleveland on it. So I bought it. It was from 1948. And so it's just like talking to this guy about his collection. It's just, I'm a big fan of giving, as you said, of like not expecting something in return. That's kind of how I operate in my business side of things and just who I am as a person. And I think the hobby could use a little bit of that, there's some great people doing great things.
Yeah. And just like I was telling you, again, my paintings are about story.
Yeah.
And that's, what the hobby was. You got that guy's story. How did you get this? What does he remember from that time period? And again, if it was a game he attended, there's a story there. Even
there's like the scorecards filled out and stuff in it. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. And again, that's when it's fun, because then your collection becomes, when you're sharing it with other people, and that's the other thing, is, I still, we could laugh here. I think in this room, I bet you, well, here, let me show you something here. You'll get a kick out of this.
Oh, wow.
So let's see here. I'm going to grab, just to show you some fun stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So we're looking at about how many binders is that right there?
Oh, this is Florida dealing. Yeah. But just to give you an idea, what am I looking for here? I just want to find something that your viewers would have fun looking at. Let's see. I'll just grab this one. What's this one? No, we'll grab this one. So anyway, that's all that stuff you see covered up behind me.
Yeah.
I was in the process of going through stuff, but so all those binders there they're all basketball sets.
Oh, wow.
But see, I keep them like this, right?
Yeah.
They're not in sleeves. They're not in cases. They're not, all that kind of stuff. They're not graded. And what happens when guys come over is, I remember sitting a couple years back, Sam Jones was here, right? He's at my place. And I pull this out. I pull out the 69. I pull out the 61, 62. And we're going through them. And we're just sitting there flipping through them. And I'm going, hey, Sam, could you guard? Here's Hal Greer. What was it like to guard Hal? And we go through them. I do it with my cousins. We play. So that's what this was. This was a way to remember and sit and talk and reminisce about different players and time periods and all that stuff. So, all this stuff here, when you start going through it, I mean, this is just, all over the place. I mean, just, so for years, what happens when I told you with basketball, when anybody needed basketball, I've been doing it for such a long time that it's one of those things where I would just, if somebody needed something for their collection, I can't tell you how many people I helped finish their 86 Fleer set. They would call, hey, I'm missing whatever. And I'd say, yeah, I got one, and just flip it off and, get it to them. But
That's awesome.
It was fun. But it's about story. It's about
It
story.
reminds me of how my brother and I found my dad's collection in our attic. And he was like, all right, let's lay them all out on the table. And and then I'm younger by 4 years, and I was probably annoying. I think I maybe mentioned this on our first episode, Joe. I don't remember, but so he was like, all right, we're going to go one by one and pick them. But every time we picked a card, my dad was giving us insight into that player. So the first pick that I picked was a 1954 Dandy Mickey Mantle from like the potato chip bag that they just threw in.
Yeah.
And so he was like, oh, that was thrown in, the tins of chips and the bags. And so then my brother picked Ted Williams. It's like 55 tops. And then Hank Aaron's second year card was my next pick. And so, but every card he went on for stories. And then he was like, all right, we're not telling more stories of these. These were no name guys, So after a while, but it was just fun. And it's like those memories like take me back to going to card shows with my dad, playing catch in our backyard. We actually, I feel like, Terry, you would appreciate this, just a connection and stories. We lived next door to a bar in Cleveland, Ohio. It's called Brown's Tavern. And the guy that owned it played for the Indians. I can't think of the year, but his name was Junior Brown. And he would just stand out there and just give us tips on like throwing and catching. And he would just stand outside and be like, all right, come on over and have a soda. And we would just go into the bar. My dad doesn't drink. And we would sit there and eat pretzels and have Cokes and talk about baseball. And he had photos of Babe Ruth and Mickey Mantle all hanging in the bar and everything. And it was just really cool. And like, I feel like stories like that don't happen anymore. And so,
well, I try to make them happen. So here's an example. So, a lot of what you see, like that stack that's behind me here, those are still all unopened boxes. So what I do is I'll do parties, or we'll go places or things like that, or when people come over. And what I do, the reason I keep all those is I go into a box and I pull out packs. So if the three of us if you guys are here, we do this. I go into one of the boxes.
You get a flight.
You get a pack, and he gets a pack. And then what we do is you open the pack, and then you play war with the cards. But what it means is, you can't look at them, so you just got to play the top card. You put yours down. You're going to put yours down, Chris, and you put yours down. And then we decide who wins. So what this means is you have to argue, right, for why your card should beat the other two, right?
Oh man,
so I have done this for years. I do it with the family. Every Christmas, people get boxes, and we do it. I do it with athletes that I know, and so we're arguing. It's great if you're doing it with athletes, right? With pro guys,
that's awesome.
They'll get a card and they'll go, no, he beat you. No, I'm better than that. No. But what it is, it's a blast. And then at Halloween, all the kids in the neighborhood know for the last 25 years, I give out packs of cards and Hot Wheels. And
that's
so
awesome.
The funny thing at Halloween is now people know. So kids come from all over now. They'll drive to get back to the house because they know they can get some cards, right? And over the years now, it's funny because this past Halloween, they took more Pokemon cards than they did sports cards. But what's funny is the kids will come up, how the parents will walk with the kids, and the kids will come up and they come back. And it's so funny because the kid will go back, hey, Dad, look what I got. And his dad will go back and get me.
That's awesome.
And I'm always, because you can hear the dad. They don't think I can hear him. I hear him. I go, you want a pack too, don't you? I said, yeah, okay, I'll send one. I said, but don't send your kid up to come get it. You got to come get the pack.
Well, I feel like maybe you're going to have a lot of people trying to come to your doorstep this year. Hopefully, once people hear this, if we get enough viewers, eventually.
Yeah, let me put it this way: I'm hard to find. With a name like Terry Smith, you're hard to find.
Yeah. Well, feel free to send me your address because I would love to come over and I'll bring some packs and bring some packs and I'll bring whiskey with me and we can open packs and have war.
Well, if you're ever out in California, we'll do the routine. You guys swing by. We'll set up a time to do it, and then I'll share some of the fun collection stuff because over the years too, with all the stuff that I do, I end up with all kinds of stuff that when we're working on uniforms, I've got all the Sharks uniforms, all the original ones. I got stuff that nobody's seen. When we were working for Fleer, I was designing cards for them for a while. So I have cards that were never issued. I've got all kinds of crazy stuff. Those crazy, I think after the crazy yellow border year, then they came out with that funky blue-green fade or whatever. But they had done a whole bunch of different test colors, like with Kirby Puckett cards and stuff. So I've got, so there's all kinds of weird stuff. They were going to make cards out of plastic. So they produced their cards out of plastic with rounded corners, and I don't think people saw those. I had created a card game for them, a basketball card game and a baseball card game that were going to be the size of the tall boys. And samples were produced, and every now and then I've seen some people selling those. So some of them slipped out. So there's all kinds of fun stuff that people who were into cards. It's not just my art stuff. There were lots of other things that I was designing, and stuff like that never saw the light of day. On the Provisions, they used to send me sheets to approve just to look at. And on those first baseball ones, when they first started to make them, they misspelled Ruben Sierra's name. So they destroyed all the sheets. I think I had the only sheet because I saw it and I go, so they had sent me one sheet to take a look at and it was wrong. So they destroyed all of them. But, that one sheet still exists. So it's that kind of weird stuff, right?
Yeah.
You end up with that nobody, there's no value to it because nobody knows it exists.
I love that story though, that, you would go to all the trouble, right? To through all of that beautiful process that you detailed earlier, right? Painting, your illustration and sending it off to get printed and whoever it was that just had to type the name out, right? Just got it wrong. And it happens. I'm certainly no stranger to that feeling. But funny how that's.
I've done them.
Myself.
I just did it on something we did for the Sharks. I did a limited run for them, and we finished it, and I had proofed it in the whole bit. I had to rerun the whole project. So yeah, it happens.
Well, and that's really interesting too. It's one of the questions that I actually had when Chris and I first started talking about art of the card. One of my kind of big thoughts was that print approval process as an artist working with a card company. If you're there, next to the press, actually pulling those sheets off and examining them, or if it is more of a remote process or maybe like a tiered process, kind of approve the first run, approve the second run, that sort of thing. Just curious how involved you have been in the past, just traditionally. And yeah, like anything like the Ruben Sierra story is really, really interesting to me as a print designer.
So for me, like I said, when I was working on the Fleer stuff, again, all I did was do the artwork and send it off. So I had no press checks, no nothing. The only reason they were sending stuff to me is so that I could see, samples of what it was. So for example, in this, see this big Tupperware thing here. So in that box there, these are these are all samples from Fleer Provision football. They're still in the wax things where they would send them to me in boxes.
Wow.
And that's
that is awesome.
And the same thing when it comes to, they'll send me stuff in uncut strips,
Wow.
right?
Very cool.
So this whole box here, this big Tupperware thing here is all full of, old, Provision samples, that were sent to me, and the early ones are all blank backs. So that's why every now and then, back in when people would run into me or I'd be someplace that they'd request something, sometime I would sign and send it to them. But all the ones that I had were blank backs. So every now and then I'll get emails, from people that Terry Smith Creek going, "Hey, I got this card and it's blank back," and they sent us. I said, "Yeah, it's legit. I was the only one that got them. So if it has my signature on it," I said, and I'll look at it. I know if it's my signature or not, and I'll say, "Yeah, it's real, and it's a blank back, and I'm the only one that got them." So you have something fun. But again, it's those things that nobody really knows about.
Were you ever upset with the color quality? I know that was a big deal for you when you were working on both your logo work and on your illustrations. Were you pretty much consistently happy with Fleer's quality, or was there like a back and forth there to get that
No,
out in?
no. Fleer made crummy cards. Everybody knows that.
I said,
Just look at most of the print. Try to get a perfect 10 on any of their early cards. You really can't, because the print quality wasn't very good. Look at the 86 Fleer, the 87 Fleer. They were awful. Again, it wasn't about, back then, it wasn't about the quality of the cards, or it was just making cards. On the stuff that I did, for example, I think I got some here. All kinds of stuff around the office. But when I printed stuff, I did a nice job on it. So I know the lighting here is terrible, but this is an uncut sheet of diamond marks. So here, again, for those, when we were talking about that Barry Bonds card, so I can try to tip it so your people can sort of see what we were talking about when that was done. But, that's how these in the backs, look more like this. So these were bookmarkers. And some of these, again, were reworkings of the Fleer cards. So like the Nolan Ryan, again, these were tall boy size. The Ricky was a remake. McGuire was done as a genie. Who else was in this one? Redid the Time Bomb one as well with Brent Thomas. But stuff like this is still, like I said, nobody knows this kind of stuff exists. But on those, again, I would run the print for that particular for company when we were doing the inserts. We did a special set for the forum. So there's a series of Laker cards that it was done by the LA Times for the LA Forum, which is where the Lakers played 25th anniversary. So there were did paintings of the 5 Laker greats. So there's a Wilt, a Baylor, Jerry West, Kareem, and Magic. And so those we were doing those about the same time we did the diamond marks. And so those again pop up from time to time. People, you'll see those. So besides the Provision, for those people who collect cards, and there were a number of people now who've been trying to go back and pick up all the artwork I did. So there's the Provision art, there's the diamond marks, and then there's the I think I got one of the Kareem ones here somewhere. Yeah. So the Laker sets, again, I apologize for this light in this room. It's pretty bad.
Yeah, it's all right. It's totally fine.
Let's see. I'll try to.
Yeah. I can see it.
With a hook, the hook shot.
Yeah. So this was Skyhook. And again, these are part of the Lakers special Lakers sets. So people can go online and they'll see it somewhere. But so that in terms of people who are trying to find a lot of the different artwork, that's one way they can find it. Is those things are out there, and as people find them, they try to gravitate to all those. I don't think any of them are too crazily priced. Although I have heard that the Ken Griffey on this one, from what I hear, is supposed to be. It seems like that one's getting kind of pricey. I haven't seen that. But other than that, I can't tell you too much. And like I said, just on the new stuff that we're doing, but the old stuff is still around. And like I said, if you guys ever get out this way, there's all kinds of crazy stuff that we worked on and did that never got made.
I think me and Chris both
Well,
are jumping out of our seats right now to go and head out west. And,
yeah. Well, the company I work for, even though I work in Boston, but we're based in Oakland, California, so I'll be out there for work. And
all right, you'll be out this way then.
Yeah. So, but as somebody who is trying to collect all of the Provisions from '91, I'm almost done. I mentioned to you when we talked, I'm done with basketball. I just finished football, and then I'm going to be working. The only baseball one I have is Dwight Gooden, but those diamond marks, the illustrations are just so cool because it makes the canvas bigger, and so like Griffey.
And these were produced on high quality. The same guy that used to do the Mother's Cookies cards produced that set. I helped him get the license for that. So these are on, and you can kind of see it a little bit here. High gloss, super. That's why you're seeing the shimmer. High gloss, thick paper, and the same thing with these. So they're produced at a much higher quality than the Fleer. So besides the size, twice the size, they're also, much nicer print job.
Well, I never intended this to be like a vlog style channel of like going to shows and going up to booths. I watch a lot of those channels just to see what's going on in the hobby or shows that I can't make it to. But we might have to do a vlog episode and travel out to your way and do this, because that would be something I think.
I know we would have a good story.
Well, we can get you better lighting, and again, that's where you could see originals and things like that, and like I said, there's all just kinds of even as I'm looking around this room, because there's all kinds of just fun little crazy things that that I'm sure again, if people knew that it existed, they would kind of go, oh really? So it's just fun stuff.
If you're up for it, we'd love to have you back on, and maybe we talk about some of that stuff that maybe people don't know exists, and even stuff like the Lakers sets, and kind of go into more detail about some of that stuff, because we're at a little over an hour and a half. I feel like I could probably talk to you for another hour and a half, but would definitely love to have you on again to go into more detail about some other stuff that we didn't cover today. So.
No, that's great. And again, like I said, what you're finding out about me and kind of what we've been talking all about, collecting is about storytelling. And what we've been doing is just sharing stories. And that's when it's fun. And so when you have people on, finding out just kind of those interesting stories about these things. So if we did it before, I'd be showing you all kinds of crazy stuff, and there's a story. Yeah. Like I pull out all the ones that I got signed. I'd be telling you stories. Okay, here's how we got these. My the Jordan that I have for Provision, I've got some that are signed by.
Oh wow!
Now they're blank backs, and you go, okay, so how did you get those signed? Well, again, I told you I've been in this for a long time. A buddy of mine used to shoot all the covers for Sports Illustrated for kids, and so he. You're gonna love it again. Stories, right?
Yeah.
So there was the Michael Jordan article where he's on the cover for Sports Illustrated for Kids. Yeah. This article.
Okay.
So when he shot all of these images before that, he goes, "Hey Terry, I'm going to see my." I said, "Yeah." So I sent him some stuff. So Michael signed him during the shoot for the Sports Illustrated for Kids. And
that's awesome.
So, but this again at that time, right? He still wasn't like when he did that. Yeah. He kind of, he was starting to blow up, obviously. So, again, it's like, everything, that kind of sneaks into the collection. There's a story. So, yeah. So when you see that Michael Jordan, that cover, that Sports Illustrated for Kids, it's like, yep, that's when that card got signed. And the photographer, yep, he's the one that got the signature. So now. Is all that stuff been authenticated and do all that stuff? You can do all that stuff. It's like, It's
Yeah.
the story. I know
Yeah.
how I got it. I know where it
Yeah.
came
Yeah.
from. I know the
Well,
whole bit. So it's fun storytelling. But anyway, I'd let you guys go. It's late back there. It was fun to talk to you guys. I hope this works for you. And if you need me again, let me know.
No, this definitely worked for us. And again, super appreciative for everybody that'll be watching this on YouTube. Um, I just appreciate all the new listeners, everybody checking out the channel, all the following that we've been getting on Instagram. It's been really awesome. And as I said, would love to have you back on, Terry, because I think people that are a fan of what we're trying to do are definitely going to be a fan of this episode and will want to hear more from you. So would love
All
to have
right.
you back on. So
Look forward to seeing you guys again. Thanks.